Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be discussing preventing domestic violence by supporting men with our special guest, Chloe Mascord. So thank you for joining us again today, Chloe.
Thank you so much for having me back. This is my second time on the podcast. I'm so excited.
Yes, we are so happy we were able to get you back on the podcast, especially despite the time zones that we struggle with between us, but we're glad you're here.
Awesome. Thank you.
And if you are listening and have not heard our first episode with Chloe, please go and check that one out. But for our current listeners, Chloe, would you please like to just quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Chloe Mascord. I'm an intimacy coach and the founder of Honey Ed. I support people to stop faking their connection and start experiencing real intimacy inside and outside of the bedroom. So my background includes working with women and therapists, but recently I've expanded to work directly with men who are feeling quite stuck and frustrated, misunderstood in their relationships. And I personally believe that intimacy is the heartbeat of how we relate, not just sexually, but also emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And it seems to be the most avoided topic in conversations at the moment.
Yeah, intimacy can be a hard thing to talk about, especially when having just switched over to working a bit more with men, we're not often given the tools to have that conversation to begin with. So I think this will be a good discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we grew up in my age group, we barely even had sex ed in schools, let alone talking about intimacy, which is obviously separate from sex, and then also relationships. You know, we're not taught how to have them. So,
So actually, really quick, speaking of that, Chloe, I know we have a few questions that we do want to ask, but I think it would be important for our listeners to kind of get that differentiation between intimacy and sex. Because like you said, those two things are often conflated to mean the same thing when actually they are different. So do you want to kind of explain that difference for our audience?
yeah, look, it's interesting. I'll give you a little bit of a story in relation to this. So I started out, my studies and certification are in sexuality and sex coaching. And I lent into that because I thought, you know, sex is such a fundamental part of our lives and how we relate with our partner. But what I realized very quickly was that is the act. However, intimacy is all of the other things around it. It's how we get to that point where we want to have sex with a partner. It's how we feel. It's how we express our emotions. It's how we feel connected to our partner. So when we're talking about intimacy, it can be sexual, but it can also just be a way that we feel connected. It could be holding hands with our partner. It could be saying really kind things to our partner. It could be doing something with our partner. It could be just spending time next to them. Whereas sex is obviously what we act, the physical act.
I think that so many people get that really confused. And, you know, as women, we have a little bit more outlet for some of those intimacy things, right? Like it's not frowned upon to sit and hold your friend's hand while you're having a conversation or to just give a hug or whatever. But men tend to, you know, hold a little bit more strict to that. You've got to be a guy's guy and you've got to be tough and you've got to blah, blah, blah. You can't do those things. And so when they're craving like that intimacy, the only way that they know how to ask for it, the only way that they know how to express it is through that kind of sexual contact. And I think that that kind of can be a real strain on a lot of relationships because, you know, maybe I want some intimacy, but not like that physical sex act. And my partner doesn't know how to give that to me without it being sex.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you brought this up around the friendship space because that is also, you know, that's something that I think is so important, that we have intimacy outside of just our relationship. And that intimacy can be just in friendships. It can be having quite a deep conversation. And that is absolutely something that men have as well, just not as frequently, and it's not normalized as much as well. But intimacy can come in all forms. You can have that intimacy and closeness with your pet, you know. It's just being given, I guess, I would say it would be like the G-rated version of sane sex. And even I got caught up in that a little bit in the beginning, in particular because talking about sex on social media is very difficult. So I would find myself defaulting to intimacy as a word instead of sex, which, you know, it happens. And even I've done it, and I'm a professional in the space. So I do want to be clear that intimacy isn't just something you have with your partner. It can be with friends, family, and it is so pivotal to feeling connected to people. It can just look very different for depending on the relationship or the type of person you are.
Yeah. And I love that a lot of this conversation is going to be kind of framed around talking about men, because this is really something, like Amanda said, like we don't really have that outlet as much. It's not socially acceptable for us to do that. But even if we are close with our friends, that the intimacy that we have with our friends is still going to look a little bit different, because we're always going to have those pressures of, well, if I'm like Amanda said, if I'm walking down the street and I'm holding my guy friend's hand, like just the thought of me like trying to do that, I get like this weird feeling about it. And
yeah,
I understand like that's okay. That doesn't say anything about either one of our sexualities for doing that. But I'm like, there's still that like, I don't know. I don't think I could do that. So
yeah, there's a lot of stigma around it. I guess I'm not sure of your ages, but I know in my generation, even sexuality was not even a conversation in a heterosexual relationship, let alone talking about all of the other moving parts. So there's a lot of assumptions that would be made in that situation, I can imagine. And, you know, we are getting a little bit more progressive, but I still think that there's some stigmas to break down in the space of intimacy, in particular with friends. And I think that is a huge piece of the puzzle, why we are where we are in society when it comes to domestic violence, is because there's so much heavy reliance for men on their partner and the way they connect with their partner. And I think if they were getting their cup filled through friendships and having that closeness with friendships, then that void that they feel that they become dependent on their partner to fill could actually, they could be getting a lot more from their friendships if we had the space to do that without judgment and without stereotypes.
yeah. And we've kind of talked about it a little bit too on the podcast before, where it's like with men, one of the hardest things for men to do is have those really sincere, deep, long-lasting friendships outside of like once you graduate from like high school, right? Like people think it's crazy that I have a group chat of like 15 people, and it's all people that I've known since like elementary, middle school, high school. I'm 31, and these are still friends that I've had to this day. I've known my best friend since I was 2.5. So we have these long-standing relationships with each other, and even those people, those are the ones I'm like, I don't think I could, like, I can hug them and stuff, but like sitting like shoulder to shoulder next to them, like on a couch somewhere, just having like that physical contact, I still feel like that would, for a lot of us, feel uncomfortable. And that's not saying like we don't care about each other and don't feel like we can't have those hard conversations, but those other forms of intimacy that we might be able to have with our partners, that's solely reserved for our partners.
I'm not even going to say that that's solely reserved for your partners. I'm going to take it a step further and say that's something that you feel like you can't do with your male friends, because I have had friends who are male who have broken up with their girlfriend, whatever, and they just feel so disconnected. They've asked me like, can we just cuddle? Like, can we just sit on the couch and cuddle? Like, non-sexual, nothing about like this is just my friend. There's no romantic feelings there. But they felt okay to ask me as a female to do that with them, but they would never ask their male friends if that was something that they could partake in.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I can definitely see like I have some friends who are girls, and I'm like, I would probably feel more comfortable as having like just sitting on the couch like leaned up against them, just like bummed out, than I would probably some of my other guy friends. So yeah, no.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you raise that around the cuddling. Many men wouldn't even ask for that. They would crave it deeply, but they wouldn't even ask to say, I really just need a hug right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that definitely we need to draw some attention to. That it's needed. That what we're programmed for as human beings is connection. And that's why I'm so passionate about this space, is because fundamentally we do all the things in life. We have the career, we have kids, we do all of that. But as a baseline, why do we exist? It's connection, to connect with others and to connect with ourselves, which is, another big piece of the puzzle as to why I want to do the work with men, because they're not taught how to connect with themselves nearly as much as we are as women.
Yeah. And it's so huge with men too. Like obviously like we're gonna be talking about this in the confines of like how this helps like reduce domestic violence, but just in general for men, that inability to really deeply connect with other people as well as connecting with ourselves, it creates so many barriers. And it's one of the main barriers that men have in having those long lasting strong friendships, and having, for a lot of men, feeling like they're fully fulfilled and have a really happy and healthy relationship. And it's, if our only way to know how to connect to a partner is through sex, if our only way to know how to connect through our friends is giving them a high five or getting drunk to the point where now it's okay and acceptable for me to hug my buddy, like we are actively moving through our day-to-day lives only as like a shell, or only like a piece of us, because that's the only part we're really allowed to experience.
I've seen it time and time again with male clients that I've worked with, and especially in my own relationships, which is something that I bring a lot into the work that I do. I think it's so important to share personal experiences, as well as client experiences, because I've seen it firsthand how there's such hesitation or I don't even think it's hesitation. I think it's a lack of understanding how to express any emotion aside from anger.
Yeah.
It's just anger. That's it. And then when you invite a conversation, what's underneath the anger? What else are you feeling there? That's it. It's just that programming of it being anger or nothing. Even sadness is sometimes a real struggle to experience, or feeling alone or feeling lonely, or just suppressing all emotions. But I think as a society, anger seems to be a relatively normalized emotion. But all of those other ones that are so needed and so warranted just don't seem to get any airtime. And that's so deeply ingrained generationally, through parents and grandparents, that we get to this point, and to even just with, the person that I'm talking to at that point, how do they get to the other emotions? Because it's just not even something that's been brought to their attention ever in their lives.
I had heard a statistic about, like generational trauma, and how, it can take 5 generations, and for that specific trauma to, have worked itself out and worked its way through. So 5 generations from now, they're feeling the trauma that you're feeling now. And I think that we need to look at it also in the opposite way of like the healing. Like it's going to take 5 generations of healing for it to just be this normalized, this is how we do things. And I mean, that's not something I don't think anybody's ever researched. That's just my personal opinion. So don't quote me on this stuff. But like, if it takes that long for trauma, I would think it would probably take at least that long for, that healing piece too.
Yeah. Look, I definitely think it's a work in progress. I think we're on the right track, but I
Yeah.
think then we've also gone a little bit the other way where I think in some circumstances it's we're wanting men to be more like women. And I think it's also that's not helpful either because then we're and I think this is fundamentally why there's such a challenge at the moment and why I'm particularly really passionate about being in this space is because there's so much conflicting talk around masculinity and what it is to be a man. It's like you go to the other extreme where it's like, talk about your feelings all the time and, share more and be more open and soften. And then so you're on the other end of the spectrum, and all these men are feeling so confused as to what is actually determined as healthy masculinity. And
Mhm.
so we're in this predicament where it's like if we go the other end of the spectrum, then it's still again inauthentic. And I think what we need to come back to is when we pull all of that generational programming and societal programming away, if I can help men become more authentically who they are, or to discover, go on that journey of discovery is who am I authentically? And as human beings, we do have more emotions. So authentically, we do feel more than just anger. When we come back to that, when you're existing in the world, you feel good. You feel good about what you're doing. You feel good about the person you are because you are yourself and you are being authentic. So that's kind of the focus that I have when I'm working with clients is let's forget about the stigma. Let's forget about society. Let's forget about what's right and wrong. And let's just come back or discover who you are as a human being and what feels good for you and hope that it will set them on a path that they're really happy to experience. That can create some difficulties in relationships for sure. But I think what we really want here is to feel the ability to be who we are at our core.
Yeah. It's when I have conversations with men too, especially around like masculinity, I try to help them understand is like if you want to be the big tough strong dude, like that's perfectly fine. You shouldn't feel pressured into that being the only way that you can express your masculinity though. Like if my belief is that I have to be a big tough strong dude, I have to be stoic, I can't cry, I can't express my emotions. That doesn't work for me. I'm going to cry at any movie that I watch. I'm going to see a dead raccoon on the side of the road and I'm going to feel really sad about that because raccoons are my favorite animal. So when we have this picture and this belief that men can only be one way and that's how you be a man, what it ends up doing is it doesn't only just suppress those other parts of ourselves, but it locks us in to feeling like that's the only way to be. And if I'm not like that, there's something wrong with me now.
Mm, for
And
sure.
I love the way that you were talking about, Chloe, that like pushing people too far to the other extreme as well, because it's not a black and white thing, we're all kind of in this gray middle ground, and these traits don't necessarily have to be masculine traits. They don't have to be feminine traits. It can just be you. And we get like this sometimes, I think, um, as a society, as a culture, there was this big movement of people trying to prove that they're not racist by saying that they don't see colors, right? Like everybody's just the same. But when you do that, when you look at things in that light, you're you're alienating people's authenticity. You're alienating their originality, their differences, and we should be celebrating those things and just not looking at it as good or bad. Just that is just how they are. And if we can get to a point where we don't have to try and put everything in these little boxes that says this is masculine, this is feminine, this is something that we can both experience, I think we're going to move as a society forward to all being more authentic. And I think that's going to be just phenomenal for humankind.
Mm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, it's when you were talking just now, I was reflecting on all of the relationships that I've had and, why they've failed, why I've personally been in multiple domestic violence situations, right? I think for me personally, I've had this ability to identify when somebody is not authentic. And I think in friendships, in just conversations, but in particular in relationships, I can sniff inauthenticity a mile away. And I think what I've realized is when I've been in situations before with men and with my partners, I've really wanted them to be their more authentic self. And so I think that has caused me to be quite critical of my partner because I really just want them to be authentic. And the reason why I want them to be authentic is because I feel safe when somebody's being themselves and tapped into who they really are and showing up with authenticity, then I feel comfortable and I feel secure. And I think that's when I really feel protected by my partner and feel safe in the relationship. And I think that has been the basis for where things have started to unravel for me, where relationships have then taken a turn into it becoming violent, is because when there's somebody sitting there going, I just be honest with me, be open. How do you really feel? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? And that would be the kind of direction I would take conversations, is to push to get honesty and get authenticity. It would then be taken in a direction where it's like, fuck, I can't do anything right. I can't do this. You want me to do this? You want me to do that? And men, fundamentally, there's this thing I've realized, I can't remember where I heard it from, and this came up when I was working with women. Women at their core often will feel like they're too much, and men will feel like they're not enough. And so when a woman starts to say to a man, I want more, I want this, I want that, I want authenticity, all they're hearing is, I'm not enough, I'm not enough. And when somebody is saying something over and over again, and the man is taking that as being pressed on the wound, it creates a snowball effect of where things go. And I think for me, there's absolutely no excuse for it going down a violent path. But I have wanted, for my own personal understanding, how did it get to that point and why did it get to that point? And I think what I realized now is, there's some reasons as to why a couple of people ended the relationship, not the violent ones, but they've said to me a few times, I'm not enough. I can't be the man you need me to be. And I'm like, my friends will go, oh, that's such a cop out. Oh, that's not true. And I'm like, no, it is. Like, that's genuinely why the relationship ended, is because they can't be the man I need them to be. But there's this complete misunderstanding. What is it that I want? Well, I don't want you to be more. I just want you to be you and stop pretending to be somebody else and following what society is telling you to be.
Yeah. Just hearing that too, it really brought up, because the women feeling like they're too much while men don't feel like they're enough. Just think about how men are taught as we grow up. If we do anything incorrectly, if I'm not perfect the first time I throw a baseball, if I cry at a movie when I'm not supposed to, oh, men don't do that. Don't be like a girl. We're teaching boys that they aren't enough if they're showing up with anything other than anger or indifference. So when we're getting into those relationships, if I believe already that to be a man, these are the things I have to do, right? Well, when any of those things don't show up correctly for me in that relationship, I'm not enough now. Or when I hear from my partner, I just need you to do this. Okay, even if you're not saying that they're doing something incorrectly, or if they're doing something to the best of their abilities and you're just trying to help guide them in a different direction. What we're hearing, though, is I didn't do a good enough job.
You failed.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that's going to be a really hard thing for some men to actually look at, is we have been conditioned to never feel like we are enough, because once you feel like you're enough, men are taught we have to be leaders. We have to be on top. Well, if I feel like I'm enough, that desire to keep that competitiveness going, right? If I have to be competitive with other men to prove I'm more of a man than them, if I feel like I'm enough, I've gotten out of that loop. I'm not in that cycle now. And we don't allow for men to get out of that cycle, because that's how you prove you're a man.
Yeah, and you don't want to be ostracized from the herd.
Yeah.
You don't want to be different. You don't want to be an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to keep raising that bar, and you're going to say, now I have to be more in this area, or now I have to be more here, or now I have to, create situations where I'm trying to prove my dominance over other people, because I can't get out of this cycle in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And
let me tell you where I think this comes from, or what I think is like so vitally important. And my partner currently is also, feels this way as well. But the one thing that I feel can really make a pivotal difference is if there is, which there often is, some level of, and I don't like to say the T word too much, trauma, but like if there is some level of unhealed, validation for this unworthiness or I'm not enough story, and it hasn't been healed, it'll continue to perpetuate. And if we don't address it and really understand what's going on and really understand, not get into it and like feel it all, but if we don't be aware of that particular trauma or something that's weighing heavy on our heart, it definitely increases and becomes worse and worse. So if we can address this major trigger or thing that continues to be pressed within ourselves, I believe there's a real opportunity for us to be more mindful of this pressure, to be more mindful of the societal implications of it. But if we can really heal that major trauma or major situation, then I think we are opening ourselves up to an opportunity to really go in a different direction. And often what I've seen with the relationships I've had where it has become violent, the common denominator is the relationship with a parent has been really toxic or has been really unhealthy or unhealed. And that dynamic has led unhealed dynamic and feelings that this particular man has towards a relationship with their father, not feeling good enough for their father. The dad continues to say things like, oh, come on, you can do better. That's not enough. Be better, do better. Something like that has always been the case when I've experienced domestic violence. And I've heard it also from many friends as well. Now, it's not always the case, but I think it's often an unhealed dynamic somewhere that's happened in childhood or throughout their lives that has then led to a situation becoming more and more and more and more toxic and violent to a point where it tips over the edge and really gets into domestic violence on another level.
Well, yeah, because when we talk about domestic violence, we talk about how it's rooted in power and control. So if there is something from your childhood that has made you feel out of control and you're immediate instinct is to try and make sure that you have control over everything for the rest of your life so you don't have that feeling of being out of control, then that's where that domestic violence can start to root from, because you need that control in order to feel powerful.
Yeah.
And it's how I know you and I've been doing this for a long time, Amanda, because my brain went to the same spot with power and control, but I want to expand it just a little bit too.
Expand it. Go for it.
Because if men are always hearing like you have to do better, you have to be better, one, that puts us in a position of belief that we are the ones who are supposed to be in control. Then we are supposed to be the ones who are making the decisions. We're the ones who are supposed to be on top. If I have this belief that I am supposed to be in control of whatever situation, or I'm supposed to be better than, well, when I get into a relationship with somebody, it is my belief now that I have to be the one in control here. If the only way that I've ever learned how to have some form of control, at least over what's going around me, is to solve that through violence, well, yeah, of course I'm going to use violence in that situation. That's how I can control this situation. I can't control this situation through other emotions. Anger and violence is all I've got. And if that's what I experienced as a kid, well, I've just been given the playbook on how to follow through with that then. So with domestic violence being rooted in power and control, a lot of what it comes down to then, at least for men who are perpetrators, is I don't want to be in a position where I don't feel powerful. I don't feel like I have control because I wasn't able to, for example, protect my mom when my dad was abusive to her. Or I've always been told I have to be better than, so that puts me in a position of power now because I'm supposed to be better. So really looking then, Chloe, at, because a lot of this conversation has kind of been around how men have learned to either view themselves or how society has kind of showed us how men are supposed to behave. So we can have that conversation all we want. We can talk about how long men are supposed, like how we can talk forever about how men are supposed to be viewed or how men learn to view themselves. But that doesn't really get at the crux of the issue of, if we want men to have better relationships with their friends, with their partners, how are we going to be able to actually start helping and supporting men in that process when men are already at a baseline kind of operating with an arm tied behind their back, because we don't have those skills? So how can we help start supporting men in this endeavor?
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting because I thought when I first started working with men, it would be a different strategy than I use for women. But it's actually not. It's the same. And where I have always started with clients is it starts with you. You might come to me with a problem in the relationship. You might come to me with a problem in your sex life, in intimacy, whatever it is. But fundamentally, when we start to connect to ourselves and do things that help us get to know ourselves, everything else flows from there. So I think with men, where I start with is we're not going to go solving the problem in the relationship. I might give you some tools to strategize, how you're going to, some examples of what to say in a conversation, where you feel things go a little pear-shaped, what's an alternative, so that they've got a tangible tool to use next time, or to get their needs met, or to be able to ask for something. There might be a couple of tools there for the relationship, but what I fundamentally think is going to help is getting to know who they are, is really understanding who they are as a human being and a person, and finding ways to not tie their worth to the things that they're doing and the achievements that they're getting outside of themselves. So it's like, okay, who am I? Let's understand who I am. What do I like to do? How can I create time in my day, even if it's 5 minutes, to be a little bit more curious? And that curiosity of who you are takes away from the work. It's like, it's just another thing I've got to do. Okay, well, let's forget about what you have to do and let's just be curious with what comes up. Create the space, and then let's start to discover what's actually sitting underneath all of it.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important part. Even just thinking about some of the relationships that I had obviously prior to being married, but it's no coincidence that once I had kind of figured out a bit more about myself or started being more authentic to who I was, it's not a surprise to me then that I was able to have and maintain the relationship I have with my now wife. Because for years I could see the relationships that I was having where I was being inauthentic to myself. I wasn't showing up as me. I was showing up as the person that I believed either the person I was talking to or dating at the time needed me to be, or what society believed I was supposed to be. So one of the ways that it played out is for years, I ignored wearing any of the graphic tees that I had. There was a good stretch in there where I didn't play Pokemon video games at all, and I love Pokemon. So I actively was doing things that didn't bring me joy because I really liked wearing my graphic tees. I liked being nerdy about stuff. But when I was making sure that those things weren't at the forefront, those weren't things that people would find out about me if I was dating them until like the 4th or 5th date, because I couldn't let them see those things about me because society has told me that's not going to work. Or I had dated somebody before where they didn't like that I was nerdy or didn't like that I played video games. So me extending that out, nobody will like it if I do those things. So once I was able to kind of work through some of that and realize like, no, I just need to be who I am. I just need to be me. My first date with Jordan, we talked about video games, Pokemon, like Super Smash Brothers, and sports. Like, so we realized from the jump that we had all these similarities, and that was really a good basis for how we started that relationship then once we went on that date. So I can really see like how like once you start to be your more authentic self, it does really help you be able to develop and maintain a healthier relationship with someone.
I think as well, adding on to what you've just said, it's all about building that trust within yourself. I think also your confidence and self-esteem erodes over time when you're not actually living in your authenticity and you're putting so much value in other people's opinions and what they think, and they tell you it's not okay. So therefore you're like, okay, it's not okay. And then that starts to bleed into all areas of your life. It's not long before you start to feel insecure, right? If you're not being your authentic self, it just breeds all these other challenging experiences of, self-esteem, confidence, and needing validation. So when we come back to who we really are and we own it, what then starts to happen as well is trust. So we say we're going to do something, which is, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I would like to do. And we find ways to be able to express that with our partner. But we also find a way to own it and trust ourselves. And I think when we build that trust and knowing within ourselves, and when we are following our intuition, which I think is also another direction of, it seems to be a lot more focused for women, is about following intuition. But I really like to help clients follow their intuition, male or female, because I think we fundamentally know at our core what is right and what is wrong for us. When we start to follow our intuition, which could be Pokemon, it's like, that's what I want. That's who I am. That's what I believe. And you follow that and you let that guide you. You literally build trust like that for yourself, that self-trust, which is, I know, something that we were going to talk about today. It's kind of come full circle background. But that is so pivotal. It's been pivotal in my personal growth. Self-trust is like the key. When we feel like we're in alignment, then that is a really good place to go with a relationship as well.
And kind of thinking too, like, again, like some of the relationships that I've had when I didn't have that self-trust, when I was obviously not being my authentic self in these relationships, it also led me to kind of accepting other things that I don't think I would want in a relationship. It's like we all know, like we would like to think we know what we don't and don't like in relationships, but I dated somebody for a couple months that I had no interests in line with them, like at all. And the entire time, instead of me being like, this is probably a relationship that's not going to work out because we don't have any interests that align, it was, why don't I have any interests that align with this person? What's wrong with me that would make it so that we aren't going to work because of this? Instead of just being like, not everybody's meant to date everybody else. There was something inherently wrong with me, so therefore I'm not good enough in this situation.
I think a lot of people, they get that feeling, and we think we have to be what someone else wants. We think we have to be, I've got to be the girl who, I don't know, loves to do my hair and makeup and be pretty all the time because that's what people want me to be. If you want to be that person, that's awesome, be that person. But if you don't want to, like, I hardly ever wear makeup. Like, not that I don't like it, I'm kind of lazy and whatever. And it's not important to me to do that. So dating people who like somebody who has makeup done all the time was not something that was going to work for me long term because I was not being authentic to me. But that's who I thought I needed to be, right? And so then I think eventually a lot of this probably has to come with age, right? Like we learn more about ourselves and we become more comfortable with ourselves as we get older. And maybe that's a reason that people are attracted to older people so much because they're living more authentically and we're attracted to that authenticity. I just cracked the code on cougars. Just saying.
I love it. I do really want to, I want to expand on what you said just before about the makeup thing as an example. I honestly, I think you've highlighted something really important there, which is what is the reason why you're doing something? If you want to do the makeup and you want to do it for yourself and you want to do it purely for yourself, great, do it. Do the Pokemon, do the makeup, do whatever you want. But if you're doing it to be loved or to fill a void within yourself that is currently sitting there, that is yearning to be filled by somebody or something else, I think that's the different factor between the two. Like that, it's honestly comes down to the reason as to why. It's like with validation in social media. It's like, what is the purpose? Why are you doing what you're doing? Is it to fill a void, or is it because you deeply want to do that? And I think when you build this self-trust and live more authentically, you can identify that. And then when you're not in alignment, you know that maybe it's not a healthy strategy or a healthy direction.
And that fill that void or genuinely want to do it is also important in case somebody hearing this is like, well, I do things that I don't necessarily enjoy for my partner all of the time. There's going to be like some compromises on like, if, for example, I didn't like going to plays. I do. If I didn't though, and my partner wanted to go see a play and I went with them, that's me showing that I have an interest in some of their interests, or I want to do this for my partner. I genuinely want to do this for them. Not I'm doing this because I feel like if I don't, my partner is going to think I don't love them. Or I'm not worthy of my partner's love because I'm not doing it. There is an important difference. But that's coming
from a place of love. So that is coming from the right place. It's coming from a place of love and wanting connection with your partner, which is also not being selfish.
Yeah. So like there's an important distinction there of like, in case someone was like, well, I always do stuff that my partner does stuff that they don't like all the time for me, and I do the same thing. Like, that's because you love them.
Yeah, we're not using this as an excuse for you to be like, I am not going to that car show because that is not my authentic self. You're going to have to do that on your own.
Oh, I love
I think we talked about
taking the rubbish out.
I think we talked about it in a couple episodes ago from when this one gets released, Amanda, about how like you're sure your husband would love it if you went ice fishing with him, but you don't need to go to ice fishing with him because he still knows that you love him, and it
And
would
that
be a
I'm
miserable time.
absolutely not doing it.
So, Chloe, I see we are getting closer to the hour mark with you today. So, to be cognizant of your time, do you have, if I'm a guy listening to this episode and I'm like, I want to start implementing some of this, or I want to start trying to figure out how I can be more authentically myself to improve my relationships, what would be a piece of advice that you would recommend? How could they start?
Yeah, look, I think a really good place to start is coming back to a place of presence. So I think when we're back in our body, I think that's a really good on a day-to-day basis. Like the more and more you can be in your body and not in your head is really a good practice to have. And I think there's many ways you can do that. I think we can't have awareness unless we're in our body. So if we can do things like, I know meditation is not for everyone, that's fine. But if we can start to do things like looking around and visually noticing things on that drive home from work, you can start to look at, oh, okay, there's that bush or that tree, and start to really use that opportunity on the way home to ground ourselves and be more aware of what's going on around us. To take some time for ourselves. It might be taking ourselves on a 5-minute walk or something like that. To come back to our body and be in our body. It might be doing exercise. It might be, going for a brisk walk, going to the gym, whatever it is that can bring us back into our body is then going to really give us the opportunity to start to be more aware about what's going on. So I think coming back to presence is a really good place to start.
Yeah, especially with just how our lives are now, where we are constantly looking at how we distract ourselves. I think having that sense of mind to come back into your body, be aware of what is going on around you, is really helpful, not just in the sense of like starting this, but just like a really good rule of thumb if like you're feeling overwhelmed. It's a great place to start too.
I think another good strategy is to be more aware of what's happening in our body. So for example, a lot of the time men will feel tension in their jaw or a tight chest. And we start to really tap in with that, okay, is my jaw tight? Is my tongue at the top of my mouth? And we start to do a bit of a body scan and see where that tension in our body is, where we're feeling that tension in our body. We can start to go, oh, okay, I'm doing the thing with my jaw again. Okay. And then we are able to relax and we're able to soften the body a little bit. It's that awareness of what's happening that I think is really, really helpful in starting to normalize being in our body more.
I also want to point out that as you were saying that, I had to unclench my jaw and pull my tongue from the roof of my mouth. So thanks for making me aware that I was doing that.
I was going to say that too, because I was like, oh my gosh, my tongue is pushed up against the roof of my mouth.
I know, it's very common.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Chloe. We have genuinely enjoyed having you back on the podcast again. Who knows? Might have you back again next season, as long as you're willing to join us again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to also mention that I do have a lot more tools and strategies for men that they can use through my podcast, Intimacy Made Easy, and then also on my website, www.honey-ed.com. Plenty of different things that you can utilize to be able to bring more authenticity to your life. I think we're not taught this, so if we can utilize some work that somebody else has done to bring more authenticity into our life, then I'm more than happy to share. So there's some free resources you'll find on my website.
Awesome. And also, way to steal my thunder, Chloe, because my next question for you is if anyone wanted to find you on social media, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So Instagram's the best place. at thehoneyed.official on Instagram.
Yes. And I'll make sure I have links to her website as well as the socials in the show notes of the podcast so you can check her out. And thank you again, Chloe, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.